Hey everybody, Jason Burmis here, and I thought I would do this video on Ben Stiller, who I think is a very well-meaning celebrity, and how he's really being duped into being a tool of war, more or less. And by the way, we're going to play Ben Stiller talking to Congress, and a lot of these things I'm going to agree with. And I see where he's coming from. But there's huge problems with all of this. Now, before we get into the videos, and especially that video, we got to do a little background here. So, Ben Stiller is part of the UNHCR. That's the United Nations Humanitarian Committee for Refugees. And listen, I get it. There is a refugee crisis. And I think that this guy is being 100% genuine when he goes out there and he's trying to help children and their families, period. I absolutely believe that. But when you start looking at this and you see how he's being used by this guy over here, you have to understand this means sanctions. And this means working with the white helmets again. And who are the white helmets? Well, they're pretty controversial. A lot of people ask why. Well, they're portrayed as humanitarian, but in reality, there is an awful lot of evidence out there that, I don't want to say the word because I'll probably get demonetized. I'd like to keep this one monetized, but you can see who they're associated with. And a lot of these accusations about them, absolutely true. Working alongside the quote-unquote rebels. And who are the rebels? Well, they're Al-Qaeda. And this is still portrayed as the enemy in some circles. In some nations, we have to stop them. In other nations, we're working with them. And guys, this is in January. Okay, this war should be over, and it just continues. It's extremely frustrating for somebody like me who one of the only reasons that I voted for this current administration was the promise to get out of war. And at one point, Trump said we were going to get out of here. But here, March article, still on the battlefield, okay? And who is it? Well, it's Al-Qaeda. Simple as that. And their ties to the white helmets are overwhelming. So how do we get into this mess? And again, I'm going to go to the Ben Stiller clip. It's a long clip. Buckle up. This one's going to be a lengthy one. But first I want to play this because Operation Timber Sycamore is at least the first time that I know of where actual U.S. troops and covert actions were taken on the ground to arm these people. So let this man break it down on Scarborough.
Different than just a war between two countries. This is as convoluted as it gets and could get out of control. I don't think people might really conceptualize, maybe even not this president, how out of control this could escalate.
It's true. But I think we have to step back and not put this in partisan terms. This is a U.S. mistake that started 7 years ago. And I remember the day on your show when President Obama said, Assad must go. And I looked at you and Joe and I said, huh?
Now let's stop it there. So when he says 7 years ago, this clip's already at least a year old, probably going more towards 2 years old. We're going to show you that this goes way beyond just the Obama administration and the Trump administration. But when actual military action was taken against Assad, yes, that's absolutely under the Obama administration. Operation Timber Sycamore.
How's he going to do that? Where's the policy for that?
Right.
And we know they sent in the CIA to overthrow Assad. The CIA and Saudi Arabia together in covert operations tried to overthrow Assad. It was a disaster. Eventually it brought in both ISIS as a splinter group to the jihadists that went in. It also brought in Russia. So we have been digging deeper and deeper and deeper. What we should do now is get out and not continue to throw missiles, not have a confrontation with Russia. 7 years has been a disaster under Obama, continuing under Trump. This is what I would call the permanent state. This is the CIA, this is Pentagon, wanting to keep Iran and Russia out of Syria, but no way to do that.
Let's stop it right there, because Iran's going to come up at a separate point in this video. Basically, if you don't know about Wesley Clark and him discussing what he learned right after 9/11, basically every nation he names has now had military action taken in it except for Iran, and Iran is last. Now, they wanted all of Syria. Did they get everything in Syria? No, but they're still pushing back. You got to understand, sanctions, if passed, is just an extension of war. Okay? So this isn't going anywhere. Let me continue a little more with this clip, and then we're going to jump into the Wesley Clark clip to preface a lot of this, because I think that's extremely important as well.
And so we have made a proxy war in Syria. It's killed 500,000 people, displaced 10 million. And I'll say predictably so, because I predicted it 7 years ago that there was no way to do this and that it would make a complete chaos. So what I would plead to President Trump is get out, like his instinct told him, by the way. That was his instinct. But then all the establishment, the New York Times, the Washington Post, the Pentagon, everybody said, no, that's irresponsible.
Not irresponsible. And I want to go back to all those people he said were displaced. That's why I understand where Ben Stiller is coming from. Yeah. The only problem is we're the ones that did it. And that's why I can't get behind a lot of these alt-righters that are saying, oh, these refugees have no right to be here. When we're talking about Middle Eastern refugees that have to leave places like Syria, places like Afghanistan, places like Iraq, when we're talking about African refugees that have to leave places like Somalia and the Sudan because of our military action, you bet your ass that's our fault. And we should be taking some kind of responsibility. That is a problem. So let me get this straight. We just get to go in there, take lives, drone bomb, put troops down, covertly arm the enemy that in turn rape and pillage in that community, and then we hold no responsibility for those that get away and want a better life. I can't agree with that. That's not being a human being. So I want to play this. This is Wesley Clark right after 9/11. I want to say this. You know, he talks about within 5 years. You got to understand, these people don't always get their time frame, but that doesn't mean they don't keep working. When I say they, I am talking about the establishment. I am talking about the permanent state. Okay? That's exactly what I'm talking about.
Right after 9/11, about 10 days after 9/11, I went through the Pentagon and I saw Secretary Rumsfeld and Deputy Secretary Wolfowitz. I went downstairs.
Let me stop that. 10 days after 9/11, Wolfowitz and Rumsfeld, okay? Two of the head honchos in the W administration.
Just to say hello to some of the people on the Joint Staff who had used to work for me. And one of the generals called me in. He said, "Sir, you got to come in. You got to come in and talk to me a second." I said, "Well, you're too busy." He said, No. He says, "We've made the decision. We're going to war with Iraq." This was on or about the 20th of September. I said, "We're going to war with Iraq. Why?" He said, "I don't know." He said, "I guess they don't know what else to do." So,
I don't know. That's compartmentalization. Do you understand? They don't know what else to do. Give me a break. There are plenty of people who knew exactly what they wanted to do. And that's why 10 days after 9/11, they were already planning to go into Iraq. And that's not even the juicy part. 10 days after 9/11, they were going to do a lot more.
I said, "Well, did they find some information connecting Saddam to Al-Qaeda?" He said, No. He says, "There's nothing new that way. They just made the decision to go to war with Iraq." He said, "I guess it's like we don't know what to do about terrorists, but we've got a good military and we can take down governments." And he said, "I guess if the only tool you have is a hammer, every problem has to look like a nail." So I came back to see him a few weeks later, and by that time we were bombing in Afghanistan. I said, "Are we still going to war with Iraq?" And he said, "Oh, it's worse than that." He said, he reached over on his desk, he picked up a piece of paper, and he said, I just got this down from upstairs," meaning the Secretary of Defense's office today, and he said,
Now, I want to stop it here. He says that 10 days after 9/11, he gets something from the Secretary of Defense's office. And he picks up that memo and then he reads it to him. What does it say?
This is a memo that describes how we're going to take out 7 countries in 5 years, starting with Iraq and then Syria, Lebanon, Libya, Somalia, Sudan, and finishing off Iran.
Did you hear all those nations? Did you get a listen? Did you get a listen? Somalia. We are in Somalia. Believe it, baby. Military escalation. This is April of last year. Yes, this is in the Sudan. We got them all over Africa. Nobody knows about AFRICOM. Somebody say Lebanon? July 2018. We bolstered our partnership to fight ISIS in Lebanon. What's this? Oh, the U.S. is now also recognizing Israel's sovereignty over the Golan Heights region in Syria. No other nation's done that. And who is that linked to? Well, Genie Energy, Jared Kushner, Dick Cheney, the military-industrial complex. And oh, look, there's a bunch of oil under it. Just, it's unbelievable. It's just the craziest, huh? So, now Syria has said they're going to try to regain that oil-rich nation that the United States says is Israel's. Currently, we have a lot going on the Gaza Strip. We've been covering that over at We Are Change and Pulse Change. If you haven't seen our video from yesterday, please check it out. We're going to be keeping up on that very fiercely. But now I want to get to the Stiller video. Because, again, I think that Stiller himself is sitting here and he's trying to do the right thing. He goes there and he sees displaced families. He sees kids. He sees war. He sees destruction. And he wants to help. And, that's why he's the goodwill ambassador. That's why he's the face of this thing. And this is his intro. It's about I think it's a 90-minute hearing. Rand Paul is the only one that really challenged him on this, and rightfully so. But Rand's section is much further along after this. Just to give you some context, it's not directly after this. But watch Stiller's response, because he knows that there's problems here, but he thinks he's not even thinking about that.
Parts of the world, the term refugee has unfortunately become politicized, despite the fact that refugees are real people with real stories. Stories that are some of the most frightening and traumatic I've heard, especially as a father. I've tried to imagine how I would feel if caught in the middle of conflict and unable to protect my children, if my son was at risk of forced recruitment or my daughter at risk of unimaginable violence.
Let me stop that there. So for people that don't understand that, as a young man, as a teenage boy, you might even have to fight for Assad's forces. And that's just a reality of this conflict. You may end up being recruited by the rebels, al-Nusra, the Al-Qaeda affiliates out there. This is a war-torn region. Okay, he's spot on there. What would you want that for your kids? Again, a lot of truth is spoken here.
Honestly, for me, it's not something I want to think about. If any of us were to take a moment to really consider this, we would have a tiny sense of what everyday life is like for millions of people around the world. Getting a chance to meet some of these people and hear their stories firsthand has been a privilege. Immediately, it becomes clear what we all have in common. Though we come from different cultures and totally different worlds, we all want the same things: to provide a good environment for our kids to grow up in, to laugh and share experiences with family and friends, to see our children grow up and achieve their dreams. These are things we all want, no matter who or where we are. And every time I leave and say goodbye, I'm aware that, but for being born in a different country, it could well be me and not them sitting in a small, cold, makeshift shelter and not being able to do any of these things.
He's right. Again, he's right. We are extremely privileged, those who live in the West. I don't talk about it much, but, I grew up on social services, welfare, food stamps, WIC, pretty poor. And even while I was growing up, I was aware enough to know that, hey, we're still in a first world country. As poor as I was, I had the ability to bring myself up. Even by the time I was a teenager and in college and working, things had escalated. My family had actually brought themselves up a lot of the time while I was in college. Started their own businesses through eBay and, really got themselves out of what was a very long rut. But I can't imagine being in a war-torn region. Forget about just even a Middle Eastern region or somewhere in South America. There are plenty of ghettos out there, folks. And the United States, just to be born here, is very, very lucky, okay? To this day, I'm not saying it's the best place in the world, but hey, compared to a lot of other places, we got it real good.
People have lost everything. This reality was all too clear last month when I was in Lebanon and I had the opportunity to meet a young Syrian family. Binana, her husband Rayed, and their 4 beautiful children. They've lived in Lebanon as refugees for 8 years now and have desperately struggled, constantly moving and constantly looking for work. Rayed has resorted to trying to sell his kidney on Facebook. And last year, when Binana was pregnant with her youngest child, a friend suggested she sell her baby to help make ends meet.
Think about that. The husband wants to sell a kidney on social media. That's a real thing. I don't think that's a story. I don't think he's making that up. I understand people lie. I get it. I get he's an actor. But these are the situations that people are in. And, you talk about the human trafficking trade. Yes, a lot of people do end up selling their children out of desperation in third world and war-torn nations. It's a reality.
Binana didn't do this, but the suggestion sheds light on the family's desperate circumstances. Their children, including amazing 8-year-old twins Yazan, a boy, and Razan, a girl. These 2 kids were very special, and I was very affected by Yazan's courage. He, just a very sweet boy. He overheard his parents talking about their struggles, and he offered to help by selling vegetables on the street for income for the family. And he's just a very little kid, and his parents didn't want him to work, but he insisted, telling them that it was better than begging. And his father, Rayed, explained that Yazan is an excellent salesman. And so I asked him, I said, what makes you such a good salesman? And he said he's good at selling because he's so cute. And while his response was funny and it made me smile, the fact that he's working as a young child, missing out on school, and often going to bed hungry is a reality that's all too common for refugee children.
And that's true. And again, when I talk about refugee children, I don't know how people can just set aside that part. That, okay, now we don't have any responsibility to these people whatsoever. And you do hear a lot of that in alternative media. The terrorists are going to come in, those refugees, they want to radicalize everybody. Now, I'm not saying there's not blowback. I'm not saying that we aren't making people that may turn to jihad because of our military actions. Absolutely possible. But again, how can we militarily displace all these people and say we have no responsibility whatsoever to the women, children, and families we've affected? I can't get down with that.
And this family receives cash and assistance, food assistance through UNHCR, but it just isn't enough for them. The overwhelming majority of Syrian refugees have always been and still remain in the countries bordering their homeland. And while these are mostly middle-income countries, the sheer size of the refugee population and the fragile nature of the region's economic and political situation puts an enormous strain on the hosting countries. The majority of Syrian refugees want to go home one day, but most don't believe that such return is possible right now. They fear for the security of their families, as well as the prospect of military conscription, lack of documents, and lack of basic services, or just for their livelihoods there.
All real.
In Lebanon, I heard these exact concerns firsthand. But in order to fully assist those who return and to monitor conditions, UNHCR and other humanitarian agencies need unhindered access to areas of return inside Syria.
Let's stop. That's a big problem. Unhindered access to certain regions in Syria. This is where you got to start picking it apart. What does unhindered access mean? That means military support. That goes just beyond sanctions. Okay, when we're talking about unhindered access, you better believe that's what that means.
While access is slowly improving, it is far from being widespread or systemic. Because it's clear that large-scale return will take time, we should expect a significant Syrian refugee population outside of Syria for the foreseeable future. In the meantime, Syrian refugees have told us what they need, and we should listen to them. They need education for their children and the ability to work and provide for their families. They don't want to be dependent on aid and to sit idly for years. Refugees have the potential to contribute to the economic and socio-cultural lives of their new communities, whether those communities are in neighboring host countries, in resettlement countries, are ultimately back in their home countries where they can help to rebuild after years of conflict. We therefore need to provide the host countries with long-term structural support. We need to help them ensure that their health services, education systems, and livelihood opportunities are available to refugees, and also that the needs of their own citizens are addressed so that both groups are able to thrive. Done smartly, humanitarian aid and development aid, not only in the Middle East, but in Africa, Central America, and elsewhere.
And I want to stop it there. We just talked about AFRICOM. We've talked about Central America and elsewhere. Yes, again, a lot of this aid that he's talking about, well, that just means UN forces. That means U.S. military forces. I get that there is humanitarian work going on, but a lot of times that is a guise for covert operations in the first place.
Can help address root causes in countries of origin, provided needed support to transit and destination countries, and help stabilize fragile regions of the world.
Thank you both for your work in trying to help this terrible humanitarian disaster. I think when we look at it, it's easy just to talk about what we should do to help the refugees, but we also should think about what caused this to begin with. Worldwide, it's either a natural disaster, lack of food, lack of water, or war. More often than not, it's both war and, naturally difficult land to harvest crops from. But if we don't understand that war causes refugee crisis and war causes humanitarian crisis, we're not getting anywhere. And there really does need to be a discussion of how do we get here. To me, there's a certain degree of irony that we and our allies and Qatar and Saudi Arabia and UAE we sent thousands of tons of weapons.
Thousands of tons of weapons. Remember, we talked about it. Operation Timber Sycamore, man.
Into Syria. And then after the aftermath of all of these weapons coming together in this clash of civil war, now that we're going to be asked to pay for the humanitarian disaster as well.
See, what he said there, I wish that Rand had gone as deep as we went, talking about al-Nusra, al-Qaeda, and all the links there. That would have been a little bit better, but he does get his point across rather well.
Maybe we should try to have, less involvement in these civil wars, less escalation of these civil wars. ISIS, we had to go back in and fight ISIS. Where did ISIS come from? The chaos of this civil war. Terrorism breeds in chaos. And so maybe we really need to rethink when we get involved in these civil wars and whether our involvement is good or bad. People say, well, if we wouldn't have gotten involved, Assad would have won the war. Yeah, he probably would have won the war in the first 6 months. Would there have been oppression? Yes, there would have been oppression. But do you think that's worse somehow than the millions of people that are displaced and the hundreds of thousands of people that have been killed in this? And these are things we should think through. My question to Mr. Stiller is, you said that you require, in order to meet the humanitarian needs, you require unhindered access. Do you think more sanctions on Syria will lead to less hindered access, or do you think more sanctions might actually lead to more hindered access to develop humanitarian aid?
I won't venture to speculate on sanctions in my role as a witness to the humanitarian plight that I've seen for UNHCR.
Very uncomfortable. You can see it right there. I mean, look at his face. I won't. That's about the least confident you're going to hear Stiller throughout this entire hearing if you go watch the whole thing. You can watch it on C-SPAN. Okay? He knows damn well what sanctions mean. And again, I think he sits there and he thinks, he's doing the right thing and he's going to be able to help families and children. But when it comes down to it, sanctions are very real. And that means military action. And we're going to let Stiller finish and then Rand Paul really break down what sanctions mean.
I think it's obviously an incredibly complicated political situation. And what I would speak to with UNHCR and to what International Rescue Committee is doing is it's about figuring out the best way to have access within Syria to allow a path for these people to go home, to have a safe place for them to go back home. So it's a very complicated issue.
Right.
I don't do it for a living, but I would say that it's when you see the face of it, in person, and I agree with you. These root causes have to be addressed. I think that's the key. But when you see the face of it in person and what's going on there now, I think it's just very important that we do everything we can to help.
Yeah, and I think the thing is that some see sanctions as war by another name. It's a softer form of war, but it's the war goes on. It's not acknowledging that basically the war is over and that somehow the tide is going to change and Assad will be defeated by sanctions. Now, I don't think he will be defeated by sanctions. I think the humanitarian crisis continues and actually probably grows from not sending aid in and putting sanctions on people who would send aid in. So I think we really do need to rethink this. Sanctions is not going to change the outcome of the war in there, but I think it will change the ability for the country to recover. You know, I'm no fan of Assad. I'm not glad that he won the war, but the war is largely over. There still is pockets of resistance in different places, but the war is largely over. And if we want to correct the humanitarian crisis, forbidding trade with Syria is probably not a good way. Embargoes lead to starvation. You know, there was an embargo on Japan before the war, embargoes on Germany. They didn't prevent the war. They actually may have brought the war on as well. So I think we ought to rethink what we're doing as far as how we treat this. There's one thing to give money and to feed people, and that's admirable. But it's another to continue the war and think that somehow we're going to change the outcome. That's all I have. Thanks.
And there you go. I got to agree with the man. I think he laid it out right there. Sanctions, embargoes, not the way to go. These pockets of resistance, I mean, who are they really? And, you know, why are we working with and backing al-Qaeda in the first place? I thought we were there to get ISIS. It wasn't about regime change. Oh, that's right. 10 days after 9/11, Wesley Clark didn't see that memo because he didn't want to see it. Don't hand it to me. He didn't want to even touch it. But we're in all those nations militarily, except for Iran. And Iran we are constantly saber-rattling against. We have classified the entire Iranian Revolutionary Guard as terrorists. And as things escalate on the Palestinian-Gaza border with Israel and Iran coming in to the Palestinian aid and possibly getting to a military spat with Israel, we may really be on the cusp of some serious military action in the Middle East. I really have downplayed the idea of being in Iran, but you know, it's the last domino to fall in that list from now almost 20 years ago, guys. And like I said, it wasn't 5. It's taken them a lot of other time, but they're in the majority of them. Guys, if you like these videos, please hit that subscribe button, ring that bell, share this stuff on social media. Right now, I can't even post over to the We Are Change and my own Facebook fan pages. I've been restricted after the banning. If you want to see all about that, you can check that out over on another video. Please, please, please subscribe, guys. I really need the help, and I want to continue doing these videos, these deep dives, and a lot more. So hopefully we're going to be putting out several videos over the next couple days. Thank you for joining me. And remember, you know, less war, not more. Less conflict, not more. And we've got to become part of the solution instead of the problem. I'll talk to you later.